Hello, everybody, and let's get straight to it. Welcome to the second episode of Community Talk with Nextone Consulting. This is our second episode, and we will be talking about five procurement-related topics in this episode. So let's start with the first one, which is approved vendor lists, right? So in many companies, in many businesses, not every vendor is authorized to be used to buy certain products, be stocked products or certain services. So that's where the companies may choose to use software systems like ERP systems to maintain approved vendor lists. Basically, they specify which vendors are authorized to be used for to purchase specific products, services. It's also useful when you, for example, go and do purchase requisitions, right? We did not talk about the purchase requisitions, but basically think of a purchase requisition as a pre-purchase order. So if you are an internal worker and you need to buy something, you feel that you need something on your desk, or you need to buy something to fulfill certain projects in your company, so you may need to kind of start inquiring, but you're not a purchaser yourself, so you don't really make a decision where to buy and who to buy it from. So what you do in the system, you create a purchase requisition that basically says, this is what I need, and you describe what you need. It might not necessarily be a specific item number that is already set up in the system. It could be just free tags that you tap in, that I need a specific type of fixture that would hold my lightning because we're in a production company and that's what we need. I don't have an idea where to buy it from. I have an idea what that fixture is supposed to do. So you create a purchase requisition, right? And when you do that, you may choose to specify whether you would like to buy it from a specific vendor if you are allowed, or you may just basically say, I don't really know who the vendor would be. It's really going to be up to purchasing department to decide where to source that item from, right? So that's where the purchasing department may use the policies for approved vendor list to basically say this specific request to purchase falls within a specific category. Let's say it's going to be called video audio production equipment, and we have five vendors that are authorized to provide us products within that category, right? So that's where the approved vendor list will be handy, right? And that's something that a lot of ERP systems have, as I said. So for you as a consultant, you just keep in mind that sometimes you may ask a question when you're doing an analysis with your client is, do you maintain any approved vendor lists for your products or services that you guys procure? And the procurement, as I said, can happen either through a purchase order in the system, or it can happen through a purchase requisition. And of course, once that purchase requisition is processed and approved and completed internally, it actually turns into a real purchase order then that is sent to a supplier, to a vendor. So that's a first concept, approved vendor list. The second concept is something that is called build to versus ship to. And that's really a designation or the thing that you can specify in the purchase order itself. So first, before we talk about this, we need to understand that sometimes we buy to a specific facility. Well, let's say we want goods to be delivered to address A, but that's not the company or that's not the address that will be paying the invoice once it comes from the vendor. So that's where we have to separate the address that is used for shipping. When we create a purchase order, we're basically letting our vendor know that this is the address that we would like you to ship it to. But at the same time, when the invoice is generated and supplier is ready to send your invoice, he needs to send that to a different address, which will be that bill to address, right? It's applicable also on the sales orders as well, just because certain customers may choose one to say, all right, ship it to address A, but make sure that the invoice is sent to address B. And there are multiple ways of handling it, right? So one way of thinking it is you can maintain multiple addresses from the vendor on a single vendor. So you can, let's say you have a single vendor account set up in your system, and that vendor account has, let's say, two addresses. One has a description, delivery address. So we know we use that address for deliveries to actually get the deliveries to. And another address can be used for invoices, right? And the same thing kind of goes on the sales order side as well. So you can maintain multiple addresses for the single customer or single vendor. So that's one way of maintaining that. And then you have to make sure that you specify a correct delivery address and also a correct invoice address. And in many systems, there are separate fields where you specify both of those addresses. Another way to handle this scenario is to actually create separate accounts. And that's, again, something that was used in a lot of old generation systems, I would say, where you would separate, where you would only maintain one single address against a single vendor account or a customer account. So you are forced to basically create a second vendor account. So in this case, what you need to do is you need to specify a vendor account that will be used for you to deliver the goods, and the invoice account, which will be a different vendor account that will be used to generate the invoice. Because it's important to record deliveries in a correct place, but also when the invoice comes, you want to make sure that the appropriate vendor account is updated with that balance that you owe to that vendor, right? And if the vendor A shipped you these goods, it doesn't mean that the vendor A would also send you that invoice. As I said, so the vendor A can send you these goods, so you create a PO against that vendor A account, but then you will get an invoice from vendor B, from a different vendor. And so the balance, so the amount owing, let's say the total of that invoice is $100, should not go against the balance of vendor A, because this is a vendor that just sends you goods. It should go against the vendor B account, because the vendor B is expecting to get paid for the deliveries of that account. And there are ways to kind of link the bill to vendor and the ship to vendor. Sometimes in older systems, if they're set up as two separate accounts, or as I said, the first approach is to actually maintain multiple addresses against the single vendor or the customer account. Right, so that's where you will see some requirements around, is it the same ship to versus bill to when you're doing your analysis. Right? And we can talk more about this if you are interested. Just let me know, and I will kind of go deeper into that specific topic. So let's move on. The second topic that I would like to, or third topic that I would like to discuss during today's session is blanket PO, right? So what you have sometimes they're referred to as blanket PO. So basically you have a commitment to a vendor that says that over the next calendar, fiscal, whatever year, I will buy 2,000 gadgets from that specific account, from you, right? And because I'm committing to that specific quantity, I'm getting maybe some preferential pricing, I'm getting some price discounts, etc. So, and then you start tracking your actual purchases against that commitment. So you create some sort of a blanket agreement. So basically, sometimes it's called a purchase agreement, sometimes it's called a contract PO. Basically, that says that we committed to buy X number of units from that vendor over a specific period of time, or we committed to buy X number of dollars worth of inventory from that specific vendor. And then you start issuing or creating purchase orders that are kind of going against that commitment, right? So that's where you're doing those releases, sometimes they call it. But in either case, what you are doing is to make sure that this PO that you're creating right now should be going against and recorded against that commitment, right? So that's a whole concept of the blanket PO. And depending on the system that you're using, there are multiple ways that you can do that, as I said. But in a nutshell, you have two documents. The first one is a commitment. It's a contract, purchase agreement, blanket PO that says this is how much we're going to buy over the next year, let's say. And the second set of documents would be your POs, your releases against that PO, right? To make sure that maybe you place in another PO for the same vendor, but that PO should not go against that commitment for some reason, just because we're buying different products, or we're buying it on different terms. But certain POs should be tracked against that commitment. And of course, you would like to have a traceability in terms of, if you look at it, a few months from now, saying how many units we already bought, are we meeting our commitment, or we should we will not meet it because that there may be some penalties to that. So it's the last part of that would be just to make sure that you're keeping track of these commitments, to make sure that you're meeting those in a timely fashion. Fourth subject would be on account versus prepaid. So sometimes you have customers that allow you to, sometimes you have vendors, let's talk about the vendors, that allow you to have purchases on account. So what that means is you place a PO with them, they ship you the goods, And then later, maybe the same day, next week, at the end of the month, they send you an invoice, basically give you a document, say, by the way, here's an invoice, here's what you owe us for the goods that we shipped to you on that PO or multiple POs, right? So that's a scenario on account. Basically, you have an account standing, you have a certain balance credit limit with that vendor, and that vendor would ship you these goods as long as it, kind of you're below your credit limit. And then you, of course, are responsible for paying those invoices on the terms that have been agreed to, right? Within 15 days, within 30 days, whatever the case is. So that's a scenario when you have an on-account relationship with that vendor. In certain cases, because of the vendor circumstances, or maybe because you are a new company, you don't have that on-account relationship. You basically, what you have is a prepaid relationship. So what that means is, before the vendor would ship you those goods, you need to pay for them in full, right? And that's very typical for consumers, things that you buy from Amazon or any e-commerce website. As a consumer, you have to basically give you a credit card, pay the amount in full, and then expect that delivery to be shipped the next day, etc. Right? So that's basically on account versus prepaid. So the prepaid is where the payment terms that you have with this vendor require you to pay a full amount before you can actually get these goods. On account is where you can get the goods and then pay for them. All right, last topic for today's session that I'm trying to keep that video short is the landed cost. So landed cost can have multiple components. So let's talk about what the landed cost is. So every item that you have has, let's say you're a distributor. So what that means, you basically buy something from someone and then sell it to your customers, right? So you're not doing any type of value added to that product. Let's stick to a very simple scenario of your distributor. So you buy something, let's say from China, for $10 per unit, and then you sell it to the customers in North America for $25 per unit, right? So the cost to the vendor is $10. So basically, when you agree and negotiate with that Chinese vendor, you basically say, we're going to pay you 10 units per that item, right? With an intention, of course, selling it here at the higher price. That's what distributors do. So when you do that, you basically issue a PO to that vendor that says $10 per unit. And let's say we're going to just keep it simple. We're going to buy 10 units. So 10 times 10, we're going to give you $100 for you to ship us 10 units of these goods to us. All right. So we owe that customer, we owe that vendor $10 per unit. But then there are shipping charges that are associated for us, because the vendor is not responsible for shipping these goods to us. It's our responsibility. So we have to pay and arrange the carriers to basically transport it by cargo ship into the North America, into our warehouse. There may be some brokerage fees, basically some customs fees that are associated with crossing and bringing those goods into the country of origin, into destination country. There may be some taxes that need to be paid, etc. So all these are components of the landed cost. So they would add to the cost of your unit. Remember, we said that we pay $10 per unit to the vendor, but the cost to us may be more than 10, right? So what I'm saying is that as you add this, let's say you had to pay $200. No, let's keep it $20 to do the freight. You have to pay another $10 to do some fees, or maybe some taxes or duties that you have to pay to customs. So the cost that you have to pay, and you're paying these things, you're paying those charges not to the vendor that sells you those goods. So you still pay $100 to that vendor, but then you had to pay $20 to a vendor B for shipping. You had to pay $10 to vendor C for that brokerage that you have a vendor account for, etc. So these costs have to be recorded as the landed cost of the item. So at the end of the day, you have to add this cost. Let's say you paid $30 additionally to bring those 10 units. And now you're basically saying that, yes, I paid $100 to vendor A for the goods themselves, but I also paid $30 to different vendors to get these items to me, to land them into my warehouse. So what you're saying is, to get these 10 units, I actually had to pay not $100, but $130. And what it would translate to in the landed cost is basically $13 per unit. So now that you know that your true cost to land those items is not $10 per unit, but rather $13 per unit. And that's important for you to make sure that you keep track of the landed cost, because maybe you use the cost to calculate your selling price, right? Remember, we said it's going to be sold at $25. So maybe, okay, so we know that we paid $13 to land that item, and we're selling it at $25. So we're making a profit of $12 per unit. Maybe it's within our range. This is an acceptable range and we're happy with it. Or maybe we can say that, no, it's not really acceptable. We need to increase our selling price to to justify the, all the admin fees that are associated with. So keep track of all the components of the landed cost to know the true cost of your item is important. And there are ways of doing that through miscellaneous charges, through adding some sort of tracking of your true charges to bring that item into your inventory. And that's something that you should not forget. So it's not really just what you pay to that vendor to get these items, it's also what you pay to different vendors and other fees that you pay to bring that item into your warehouse where it can be then resold. All right, so just wanted to keep that video under 15 minutes. Thank you very much for your attention. And we're going to continue the next session number 3 of our community talk with various or different procurement and purchasing topics. Until then.